The dust motes danced in the single beam of afternoon sun, slanting through the grimy window of the post office, each one a tiny, glittering world. I was only there to mail a package back home, a collection of textbooks I wouldn't need for the summer semester. It was a mundane errand in a town I barely knew, a place I'd only been living in for 3 months. My life was a series of mundane moments, carefully curated and comfortably predictable, and I liked it that way, or at least I thought I did. The bulletin board was a chaotic collage of local life, flyers for bake sales, ads for lawn mowing services, a lost cat with one ragged ear. And then, tucked between a yoga class schedule and a notice about town hall hours, I saw my own face. It wasn't my face now, at 22. It was younger, the cheeks still rounded with the softness of childhood, the hair a shade lighter, cut in a choppy bob I vaguely remembered hating. The girl in the photo was maybe 12. Her eyes, which were my eyes, stared out with a flat, haunted expression. Above the grainy image, bold, faded letters screamed a single word, missing. My breath hitched. The package in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I stepped closer, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs like a trapped bird. The name printed below the photo wasn't mine. Alara Vance. It was Lily Anderson, age 12, last seen at Northwood Park 10 years ago. A list of physical descriptors followed: height, weight, a small crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow. My fingers flew to my own brow, tracing the faint, silvery line that was always there, a line my mother, Martha, said I'd gotten from falling off a swing set when I was 7. But this poster said the girl was 12. The details swam before my eyes, the black ink blurring into a gray soup. Disorientation washed over me, a wave of vertigo that made the tiled floor seem to tilt beneath my feet. It had to be a coincidence, a doppelganger. People have them all the time, right? It was just a girl who looked like me, who happened to have the same rare scar in the exact same spot. A sick, cold knot tightened in my stomach, rejecting the logic. It was too specific. It was me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and slick with a sudden sweat. I took a photo of the poster, the click of the shutter sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. My hands were shaking so badly the first image was a blur. I took another, forcing myself to hold steady. I needed to call my mom. She would explain this. She would laugh her warm, comforting laugh and tell me I was being silly, that my imagination was running away with me again. I backed away from the board, bumping into a stand of greeting cards and sending a few fluttering to the floor. I didn't stop to pick them up. I pushed through the heavy glass door and stumbled out into the humid air, gasping as if I'd been holding my breath underwater. I dialed her number, the familiar sequence a small anchor in, the swirling chaos of my mind. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Alara, sweetie, is everything okay?" Her voice was the sound of Sunday dinners and clean laundry, the very definition of home. "Mom," I started, my own voice a reedy whisper. I saw something weird." I tried to keep my tone light, casual, but it cracked under the strain. "I'm at the post office, and there's this old poster on the wall, a missing person poster. And Mom, it looks just like me." There was a pause, not a long one, just a fraction of a second too long. A tiny pocket of dead air that had never been there before in all our thousands of conversations. "Oh?" Her voice, when it came back, was a little thinner, a little brighter. "A little girl who looks like you? How strange. You must have one of those faces." I swallowed hard, the knot in my gut tightening. No, Mom, it's not just that she looks like me. It's identical, and it says she has a scar right here. I touched my eyebrow again, a gesture she couldn't see, but one I needed to make. Another beat of silence. This one was heavier. I could hear something in the background, a faint clattering, as if she'd dropped something. "Elara, you're letting your mind get the better of you," she said, her tone shifting from concerned to faintly chiding. "It's an old poster. The picture is probably faded. You're just seeing things. Now, did you mail those books? Your father was just asking if you'd sent them off." The change of subject was so abrupt, so jarring, it was like a door slamming shut in my face. It was dismissive, and that wasn't like her. My mother was a worrier. A scraped knee warranted a 20-minute interrogation. A weird poster of a girl who looked exactly like me should have sent her into a tailspin of maternal concern. Instead, she was asking about textbooks. "Yeah," I mumbled, "I'm about to." "Good. Well, listen, I've got to run. The casserole is about to burn. Call me later, okay? And don't think about that silly poster anymore. It's nothing." The line went dead before I could say another word. I stood on the sidewalk, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. "It's nothing." Her words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. But the cold dread coiling in my stomach told me a different story. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. The drive back to my small rented apartment was a blur. I remember the green of the traffic lights, the press of the brake pedal, the familiar turn onto my street, but I wasn't really there. My mind was 1,000 miles away, or rather 10 years in the past, stuck on a grainy photograph and a name that wasn't mine. Lily Anderson. The name felt foreign on my tongue, yet the face was my own. Back in the sterile quiet of my apartment, I threw my keys on the counter and sank onto the sofa, my body feeling heavy and disconnected. The textbook box sat by the door, forgotten. My mother's reaction replayed in my head, each word, each pause, each subtle inflection now magnified and suspect. She hadn't asked me to send her the picture. She hadn't asked what town the girl was from. She hadn't asked a single question a normal mother would ask. She had deflected, dismissed, and disconnected. It was the reaction of someone who was hiding something, someone who was scared, and that scared me more than the poster itself. I pulled out my phone and stared at the picture I'd taken. I zoomed in on the girl's face, my face. The bangs were uneven, as if cut at home. The eyes held a deep sadness, a premature weariness that a 12-year-old shouldn't possess. I opened my laptop, the hum of the fan filling the silent room. My fingers trembled as I typed "Lily Anderson missing" into the search bar. The results flooded the screen, a digital ghost story resurrected with a click. Article after article from a decade ago, mostly from local newspapers in a place called Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania. I lived in Ohio now. We had moved here from Illinois when I was 8, or so I'd been told. Pennsylvania had never been part of my story. The articles told a sparse, tragic tale. Lily Anderson, 12, vanished from a public park on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. She had been there with her father, Michael Anderson. There were conflicting reports. Some witnesses said they saw them playing on the swings. Another thought they saw a man arguing with her father near the parking lot. Her mother, Sarah Anderson, had been at work. No ransom note was ever sent. No credible leads ever surfaced. The case went cold within a year, a permanent aching question mark, in a small town's history. I clicked on an image link, and a gallery of photos appeared. There was the poster photo again, a school picture, and beside it, another photo, this one of Lily with her parents. My heart squeezed. In the picture, a smiling man with kind eyes and dark, wavy hair had his arm around a woman with a gentle face and the same light brown hair as me. Lily, me, stood between them, squinting into the sun, a gap-toothed smile on her face. A real smile. Not the haunted look from the poster. These were my parents, not Martha and Richard, my parents. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I stumbled to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, my body convulsing with the force of a truth it couldn't contain. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a mistake. My entire life, the foundation upon which my identity was built, was a lie. Martha and Richard Vance, the people who had tucked me in at night, who had helped me with my homework, who had celebrated my birthdays, were not my parents. They were my abductors. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The face was the same, but it was a stranger's. Who was I? Elara Vance didn't exist. She was a fiction, a character they had created for me to play. My real name was Lily, and my real parents. What happened to them? The article said I was with my father. I scrolled through. The text again, my eyes scanning for his name, Michael Anderson, the smiling man with the kind eyes. He was reported missing at the same time. He had vanished with his daughter, but I hadn't vanished. I was here, which meant, what happened to him? A cold, terrifying thought began to form in the darkest corner of my mind. A thought so monstrous I tried to push it away. They took me. What did they do to him? I thought about my childhood, my Vance childhood. It was a carefully constructed narrative, full of love and stability. But now that I looked at it through this new, horrifying lens, I saw the cracks. We never talked about my birth or my toddler years. When I asked, Martha would get a vague, sad look on her face and say it was a difficult time, and that I'd been a very sick baby. There were no photos of me before the age of about 8. When I'd pointed this out once, Richard had snapped. We lost a box of photos in the movie from Illinois. It's not a conspiracy, Elara. His anger had been so sudden and disproportionate that it had stunned me into silence. Now it made perfect, chilling sense. There were no baby photos because I wasn't their baby. The move from Illinois wasn't just a move. It was the beginning of my new life, my fake life. They had started over in a new state where no one knew them, with a new daughter. The pieces were slotting together, forming a picture of unimaginable betrayal. The people I loved most in the world, the people who were my entire world, had stolen me, and they had been lying to me every single day for 10 years. The apartment suddenly felt like a cage. I had to go home. I had to face them. But not as Elara, their compliant daughter. I had to go home and find the proof. The 2-hour drive home felt like a journey into enemy territory. Every familiar landmark, the big red barn with the peeling paint, the river that snaked alongside the highway, the sign for my hometown, seemed menacing, part of a landscape of deception. I rehearsed what I would do, what I would say. I couldn't confront them directly, not yet. They had a 10-year head start on this lie, and my mother's phone call proved they would close ranks and deny everything. If they were capable of kidnapping a child, what else were they capable of? The monstrous thought about my real father, Michael, returned, colder and sharper this time. I needed to be smart. I needed to be quiet. I needed to become a detective in my own home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had. A pleasant 2-story colonial with a neatly manicured lawn and a welcoming front porch. It was a facade of suburban normalcy, and for the first time, it looked sinister. Martha met me at the door, her face a mask of concern. "Elara, you're home early. I was so worried when you didn't call back." She wrapped me in a hug, her familiar scent of lavender and vanilla filling my senses. It was the scent of safety, of love, and it was a lie. I stiffened. In her arms, my body rigid with a betrayal, so profound it felt like a physical illness. I forced myself to relax, to play the part. "Sorry, Mom, my last class was canceled. I just wanted to come home." She pulled back, searching my face. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale. Was it that silly poster? I told you not to worry about it." Her words were smooth, practiced. She was testing me. No, just tired," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Long week." Richard was in the living room, reading the newspaper. He looked up over his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Hey, kiddo, back already?" "Hey, Dad." The word felt like ash in my mouth. For the next few hours, I moved through the motions of a normal family evening. I helped Martha with dinner. I asked Richard about his day at the accounting firm. I answered their questions about college. Every word was a performance, every smile a carefully crafted lie. I was an actor on a stage, and my audience was a pair of kidnappers. The entire time, my mind was racing, cataloging the house, searching for inconsistencies, for places they might hide a decade-old secret. And then I remembered the trunk. It was in the attic, a large dark wood steamer trunk with heavy brass latches. It had been there for as long as I could remember. When I was younger, I'd asked what was inside. "Just old things from your grandmother," Martha had said breezily. "Keepsakes, nothing interesting." It was always locked. "The key was lost ages ago," Richard had grumbled when I'd once tried to jimmy the lock with a bobby pin. They had made it clear the trunk was off limits. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, the floral wallpaper and familiar shadows offering no comfort. I listened to the sounds of the house settling, the groan of the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft snores from my parents' room down the hall. Once I was certain they were asleep, I slipped out of bed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crept up the attic stairs, each step a creak of protest in the silent house. The attic was hot and smelled of dust and forgotten things, and there it was in the far corner, under a dusty white sheet, the trunk. It was even bigger than I remembered, a relic from another time. It looked like a coffin. I ran my fingers over the cold brass lock. The key was lost ages ago. A lie. They were all lies. Where would they hide a key they didn't want me to find? I spent the next hour searching their bedroom, my hands shaking as I carefully opened drawers and sifted through jewelry boxes. Nothing. I moved to Richard's home office. I checked his desk, the bookshelf, the pockets of his old jackets in the closet, and then I saw it. Tucked away in the back of a drawer full of old checkbooks and tax records was a small, ornate brass key, attached to a simple string tag. On the tag, in Martha's neat cursive, was a single word: memories. My breath caught in my throat. I pocketed the key and crept back to the attic, my pulse roaring in my ears. With trembling hands, I fit the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I lifted the heavy lid. A wave of musty, cedar-scented air washed over me. It wasn't full of Grandma's keepsakes. The top layer was a small, folded blanket, yellow with a pattern of bluebirds. Beneath it was the life of Lily Anderson. There was a stack of children's books, their covers worn and soft. There was a small, tattered teddy bear with one button eye. And then I saw the clothes, a pair of denim overalls, a red t-shirt, a little floral dress. They were clothes for a girl, a young girl, my size, 10 years ago. My hands dug deeper, past the clothes, and hit something hard. A wooden box. I lifted it out. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were the artifacts of my stolen identity. A school report card from Harmony Creek Elementary, the name Lily Anderson printed neatly at the top. A silver locket, tarnished with age. I opened it. On one side was a tiny photo of the man with the kind eyes, my father. On the other, the woman with the gentle smile, my mother. And at the very bottom of the box, a single folded newspaper clipping. Local father and daughter still missing. Police suspect foul play. Below it was the photo of the three of them, the one I'd seen online. My real family. I sank to the floor, the report card clutched in my hand, the truth of physical weight crushing the air from my lungs. Downstairs, I heard a floorboard creak. The gentle rhythm of my father's, of Richard's, snoring had stopped. They were awake. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my shock. The sound of the creaking floorboard from downstairs was a warning shot. I shoved the box, the clothes, everything back into the trunk in a frantic, clumsy heap. My hands fumbled with the heavy lid, and it slammed shut with a muffled thud that sounded as loud as a thunderclap in the silent house. I locked it, pulled the key out, and scrambled to throw the dusty sheet back over it, trying to make it look untouched. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I could hear movement now, footsteps in the hallway below. I had to get out of the attic. I scurried to the top of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the old wood, and peered through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. The hallway light was on, casting a long, distorted shadow up the stairwell. I saw Richard's silhouette as he walked from the kitchen toward the base of the stairs. He paused, looking up, his head tilted as if he were listening. I held my breath, flattening myself against the wall, praying the darkness of the attic would conceal me. Did he hear the trunk slam? Did he know I was up here? After a moment that stretched into an eternity, he seemed to satisfy himself, shaking his head slightly before turning and heading back toward his bedroom. The hallway light clicked off, plunging the house back into darkness. I waited, my body frozen for what felt like hours, listening for any other sound. Nothing, just the familiar hum of the house. Slowly, painfully, I crept back down the stairs, each step a calculated risk. I slipped back into my room, my sanctuary that now felt like a prison cell, and slid the key into the back of my own jewelry box, a place they would never think to look. I crawled into bed, but sleep was impossible. My mind was a maelstrom of images, the faded photo on the poster, the kind eyes of my real father, the neat cursive on the tag of the key, memories, not their memories, mine. They hadn't destroyed the evidence of my past life. They had curated it, locked it away like a dark secret. Why? Was it a twisted form of sentimentality? A trophy? Or was it a contingency, something to be used or destroyed if the truth ever came out? The naive girl who had driven home that afternoon was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. The fear was still there, a constant icy hum beneath my skin, but something else was growing alongside it. A hard, sharp-edged resolve. I couldn't run, not yet. Running would make me a fugitive, and it would leave too many questions unanswered. What really happened to my father, Michael? The newspaper clipping said foul play. Did they kill him? The thought was so vile, so unthinkable, yet it clung to me. And what about my brother? My brother, Leo. Leo was 4 years older than me, Richard and Martha's biological son. He was away at college, but would be home for the summer in a few weeks. Our relationship was complicated. He was often distant, moody, living inside his own head. But there were moments, flashes of a fierce, quiet protectiveness that I never understood. When I was 14 and a boy from school was bullying me, Leo had shown up at the boy's house and had a conversation that left the boy pale and silent whenever I was near. He never told me what he said. Martha and Richard had doted on him, but there was always a tension there, an unspoken strain I couldn't name. Now I wondered, what did he know? He would have been 14 when they brought me home. A 14-year-old boy wouldn't just accept a new 8-year-old sister without questions. They must have told him a story, a very convincing story, or was he part of the lie? The thought made me sick. I needed to know where he stood, but more than that, I needed undeniable proof. The contents of the trunk were damning, but it was my word against theirs. They could say I was unstable, that I'd fabricated it all. I needed something they couldn't deny. I needed a confession. The next morning, I initiated my plan. It was a terrifying gamble, a high-wire act of deception. I had to be the perfect daughter, even more so than before. I had to lull them into a false sense of security, make them believe their secret was safe. At breakfast, I was cheerful, chatty. I apologized for being moody and weird the day before. I think I'm just stressed about finals, I said, pushing a piece of pancake around my plate. And that poster thing was just so bizarre, it kind of freaked me out. You're right, Mom. I have a crazy imagination. I watched Martha's face closely. A wave of relief washed over her features, so subtle it would have been invisible to me 2 days ago. Her shoulders relaxed. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Of course, sweetie, it's perfectly understandable, but it's over now. Let's not think about it again. Richard grunted in agreement from behind his newspaper. Good, all that nonsense is a waste of time. They believed me, or they wanted to. For the first time, I saw their weakness, their desperate need for the lie to hold. Their entire world was built on it. They were so invested in the fiction of our happy family that they were willing to accept my performance at face value. This was the vulnerability I could exploit. My phone was no longer a tool for communication. It was a weapon. I started carrying it with me everywhere, setting it to record audio whenever I was in the same room as them. I would leave it on the kitchen counter while we cooked dinner, on the end table in the living room while we watched TV. It was a long shot. They were careful, but they were also comfortable, and comfortable people get careless. For days, I recorded hours of mundane chatter, but I was planting seeds, carefully dropping names and places from my secret research into our conversations, hoping to trigger a reaction, a slip-up. I was no longer just their daughter. I was a spy in my own home, waiting for the mask to slip. Leo came home 2 weeks after my discovery. His arrival filled the house with a new, volatile energy. I watched him from the moment he walked through the door, my senses on high alert. He hugged Martha, gave Richard a firm handshake, and then turned to me. "Hey, Squirt," he said, ruffling my hair with the casual affection he'd always shown. But when his eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of something else, a wariness, a question. He knew something was different. The atmosphere in the house grew thicker, more charged. Martha and Richard were on their best behavior, playing the role of proud parents welcoming their son home. But I could feel them watching me, watching my interactions with Leo. They were afraid of what I might say to him. I knew I couldn't keep the truth from him for long. He was the only other person who had been there, the only other witness to the start of this lie. His allegiance was the unknown variable that could either save me or condemn me. I had to take the risk. I waited 2 days, letting the manufactured calm of our family reunions settle. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, when I knew Martha and Richard were out grocery shopping, I found Leo in the backyard, shooting hoops. The rhythmic thud of the basketball against the pavement was the only sound. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He stopped, holding the ball against his hip. He studied my face, his own expression guarded. "Sure, what's up?" We sat on the back steps, the warm sun on our faces a stark contrast to the cold topic I was about to broach. I didn't know how to begin, so I just started. "Leo, do you remember when I first came to live here?" His body went rigid. He stared straight ahead at the weathered backboard of the basketball hoop. "Yeah, of course." "What did they tell you?" I pressed, my heart starting to pound. "About me?" He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "They said you were our cousin, that your parents, that they died in a car crash." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes dark with a long-held turmoil. "They said we had to change your name and move away for legal reasons. Something about a complicated estate. I was 14, Alara. I didn't question it." "But you knew it was weird," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You knew something was wrong." A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice rough. "It always felt off, the way they were so secretive, the way you were so quiet and scared for that first year. You used to have nightmares. You'd scream a name in your sleep." "What name?" I asked, my breath catching. He looked down at his hands. "Lily," he said. The name hung in the air between us, a ghost finally given voice. I asked Mom about it once, and she slapped me, told me to never mention that name again, and to never ever talk about it with you. The moment had come. I took a deep breath and pulled my phone from my pocket. I navigated to my photo gallery and held it out to him. On the screen was the picture of Lily Anderson and her real parents, Michael and Sarah. "This is me, Leo," I said, my voice shaking. "My name is Lily Anderson, and these are my real parents. They didn't die in a car crash. Martha and Richard took me." Leo stared at the phone, his face draining of all color. He took it from my hand, his fingers trembling as he zoomed in on the smiling faces. He looked from the phone to me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "No," he whispered. "No, it can't be." "It is," I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "I saw a missing person poster. It's all online. They took me from a park in Pennsylvania 10 years ago. They've been lying to us this whole time." He looked utterly broken, the carefully constructed walls of his own denial crumbling around him. The distant, moody brother I knew was gone, replaced by a terrified young man confronting an impossible truth. "I knew it," he breathed, shaking his head. "I always knew something was wrong. I was a kid. I was scared of them, of Dad." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "What are we going to do?" The "we" was the most important word I had ever heard. He was with me. I wasn't alone anymore. The relief was so immense, it almost brought me to my knees. "I have a plan," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I need your help. I need proof they can't deny. I need them to confess." I explained my idea. He would wear a wire, a small digital recorder. He would confront them, not with anger, but with concern. He would tell them I was having a breakdown, that I was obsessed with this Lily Anderson person, and that he needed them to tell him the real story so he could help me. He would play the part of the loyal son, trying to manage his unstable sister. It was a dangerous role, asking him to lie to the two people he had spent his life, trying to please and appease. He was pale, his hands clenched into fists, but he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "I'll do it." The next day, we bought a tiny, high-fidelity audio recorder from an electronics store in the next town over. As we drove back, a new terrifying thought occurred to me. "Leo," I said, my stomach twisting, "if they're getting nervous, what if they try to get rid of me, for good?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the road. "They're planning a family trip," he said finally, his voice grim. "To the cabin next weekend." The cabin, a remote, isolated place in the mountains with no cell service and no neighbors for miles. It was their favorite getaway, and it was the perfect place to make someone disappear. The timeline had just been accelerated. We didn't have weeks, we had days. The confrontation had to happen now, before they could get me to that cabin. That night, after our parents were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table and planned the ambush. Leo would do it the next evening, right after dinner. I would be hidden in the adjoining pantry, the door cracked just enough to hear, my phone recording as a backup. We were setting a trap for our parents, and we both knew that if it failed, I might not live to see the next morning. The following evening was the longest of my life. Every minute leading up to the confrontation felt stretched and distorted, like time was moving through molasses. Dinner was a surreal performance of normalcy. Martha had made my favorite, lasagna, a gesture of maternal love that now felt like a calculated manipulation. I pushed the food around my plate, my stomach a tight, acid-filled knot. I could barely swallow. Richard talked about a deal that had fallen through at work. His voice a low grumble of frustration. Leo was unnervingly calm, asking the right questions, nodding at the right times. He was a better actor than I was. To anyone watching, we were a typical family sharing a meal. But under the table, my leg bounced with uncontrollable anxiety, and I could feel the tension radiating from Leo in waves. After dinner, as Martha and I cleared the plates, Leo gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. My heart leapt into my throat. I carried a stack of dishes into the kitchen, and instead of loading the dishwasher, I slipped into the small walk-in pantry, pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving only a sliver of a crack to see and hear through. The pantry smelled of onions and dried spices. I crouched in the darkness, my back pressed against a shelf of canned goods, and fumbled with my phone, starting the audio recording. Then I pulled out the tiny digital recorder Leo had given me earlier. It was already on, its red light blinking in the dark. I held my breath and waited. I heard Leo's footsteps as he entered the kitchen. "Mom, Dad, can I talk to you guys for a second?" His voice was steady, laced with a convincing note of concern. "Of course, honey," Martha said, her voice warm. "What is it?" Richard entered the kitchen behind her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Everything okay, son?" "It's about Alara," Leo began, his tone heavy. "I'm worried about her. She's been acting strange ever since I got home. And she told me some crazy stuff yesterday." From my hiding spot, I could see Martha's back stiffen. Richard tossed the towel onto the counter, his posture becoming more rigid. "What kind of crazy stuff?" Richard asked, his voice sharp. "She's got this idea in her head," Leo continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "She thinks she's some girl who went missing years ago. A girl named Lily Anderson. She showed me things she found on the internet, a picture. She's convinced you guys kidnapped her." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator's compressor. Martha turned around slowly, her face a pale, strained mask. "That is ridiculous," she said, but her voice was thin, brittle. "She's just stressed. I told her that." Richard took a step closer to Leo, his eyes narrowed. "Where is she getting this from? Did you put these ideas in her head?" "No, of course not," Leo said, feigning shock. "I'm on your side. I'm worried she's going to do something stupid. Go to the police or something. I need you to tell me what's really going on so I can help her. So I can convince her she's wrong. You told me her parents died in an accident. Is that the whole truth? Just tell me everything so I can shut this down." It was a masterful performance. He had framed it as an act of loyalty, an attempt to protect them. He had given them an opportunity to confide in their real son. Richard stared at Leo, his gaze intense, searching. For a terrifying moment, I thought he didn't buy it. But then, his shoulders slumped slightly. He ran a hand over his face, looking exhausted. "It's complicated, son," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Martha shot him a panicked look. "Richard, don't." "He needs to know, Martha," Richard snapped, his voice rising. "He's not a kid anymore. If she's going to blow our lives up, he deserves to know why." He turned back to Leo. "Her parents didn't die in an accident. We didn't exactly kidnap her either. It was a rescue." "A rescue?" Leo asked, his voice filled with feigned confusion. "Her father was a degenerate gambler," Richard said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Her mother had already left him. He was dragging that little girl all over the place. We saw how neglected she was. We tried to help, offered him money to get back on his feet, but he just gambled it away." Martha picked up the thread, her voice trembling with false sincerity. "We loved her from the moment we saw her, Leo. We knew we could give her a better life, a stable home. So we took her. We gave her a new name, a new life. We saved her." The self-serving narrative was so complete, so twisted, it made me feel sick. They had painted themselves as heroes. I clutched the recorder, my knuckles white. This was it. It was a confession, a warped one, but a confession nonetheless. But then Leo pushed further. "What about her father? The articles say he went missing too." Richard's face darkened. The air in the room grew heavy, toxic. "He wouldn't let her go," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "He came after us. We had an argument. Things got out of hand." "What do you mean, out of hand?" Leo pressed. Richard looked directly at Leo, his eyes cold and hard as stone. "He had an accident, a permanent one. And if Alara keeps digging, if she doesn't drop this, we'll have to make sure she has an accident too. We'll take her to the cabin and we'll fix this. For good. The threat hung in the air, explicit and chilling. They hadn't just kidnapped me, they had murdered my father, and they were ready to do the same to me. Crouched in the darkness, I felt the last vestiges of my childhood crumble into dust, replaced by the horrifying certainty of what I was dealing with. These were not my parents, they were monsters. The finality of Richard's words, "We'll fix this, for good," sucked the air out of my hiding place. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise, a statement of intent. My blood ran cold. My father, Michael, hadn't just disappeared. He was dead, murdered by the man I had called Dad for more than a decade. And now that same man was planning to fix me at a remote cabin where no one would ever hear me scream. The small, dark pantry suddenly felt like a tomb. I had to get out. I had to get the recording to the police. My mind raced, trying to form a plan through the thick fog of terror. Leo was still in the kitchen with them, trying to de-escalate. Okay, I get it," he was saying, his voice strained. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her see sense. We don't need to do anything drastic." "You'd better," Richard snarled. "This family stays together, no matter what." I used their intense focus on Leo as my chance. I began to back away from the pantry door, moving with agonizing slowness, my feet searching for clear floor space in the cramped darkness. My hand brushed against a rack of glass jars, and a bottle of olive oil teetered precariously. I froze, my heart seizing in my chest, and held it steady. The slightest noise would give me away. I needed to get to my room, lock the door, and send the audio file. I had been in cautious contact with Detective Miller from the Harmony Creek Police Department, the original investigator on Lily Anderson's case. He was an old-timer, semi-retired, but had never given up on finding me. I had sent him an anonymous email with just enough detail to get his attention. He had replied with a secure way to contact him, a lifeline I now clung to. I managed to slip out of the pantry and into the dining room, my body pressed low to the ground. The floorboards groaned softly under my weight, and I froze again, listening. In the kitchen, Martha was crying softly now. "I can't lose her, Richard. I can't." Her grief was for the daughter she had stolen, not the one she was willing to murder. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I crawled on my hands and knees through the dining room and into the front hall, my phone clutched in one hand, the tiny recorder in the other. The stairs were my biggest obstacle. They were old and notoriously creaky. I took them one at a time, testing each step with my toe before putting my full weight down, my breath held tight in my lungs. It felt like climbing Mount Everest. Halfway up, Leo came out of the kitchen. I flattened myself against the wall on the darkened landing, praying he wouldn't look up. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside, presumably to get some air. The brief flood of light from the open door illuminated the bottom of the stairs, and I squeezed my eyes shut, convinced I was caught. But he closed the door without a second glance. I scrambled the rest of the way up and fled into my bedroom, quietly turning the old brass lock on the door. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely operate my phone. I plugged the digital recorder into my laptop, transferred the file, a process that took an agonizingly slow minute, and then attached the pristine, damning audio to an email addressed to Detective Miller. The subject line was simple: Lily Anderson, confession. I hit send and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. The file was large. The Wi-Fi signal in my room was weak. It was moving at a snail's pace. Outside, I heard the front door open and close again. Leo was back inside, then footsteps, heavy ones, coming up the stairs. Ilara, it was Martha's voice, thick with false concern, calling from the hallway. Sweetie, are you in there? Leo told us you were upset. Can we talk? I didn't answer. I stared at the progress bar. 40%. Ilara opened the door. Richard's voice boomed, hard and commanding. The doorknob rattled. Don't make this harder than it has to be. 60%. My breathing was shallow, ragged. I was a cornered animal. I backed away from the desk, toward the window, looking for another way out. It was a 2-story drop to the bushes below. Too risky. That's it, Richard growled. A heavy thud slammed against the door, making the whole frame shudder. He was trying to break it down. Another slam, louder this time, accompanied by the splintering of wood near the lock. Panic surged, hot and blinding. 85%. The door wouldn't hold for much longer. I could hear Martha in the background, pleading, Richard, stop! You're scaring her. She should be scared, he roared back. Crack. A long fracture appeared in the door panel. I could see a sliver of the hallway through it. 95%. Come on, come on. Another thunderous blow, and the lock housing splintered away from the frame. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. Richard stood there, his face purple with rage, his chest heaving. Martha was behind him, her face a mess of tears and terror. For a split second, we were frozen, a horrifying tableau. His eyes locked on me, then darted to the laptop screen. He saw the email, the progress bar, 100%. Message sent. A look of pure, murderous fury crossed his face. He lunged for me. But at that exact moment, a sound cut through the night. A sound so beautiful and so terrifyingly real, it made me sob with relief. Sirens, not one, but a chorus of them, wailing in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Leo. It had to be Leo. He must have had a backup plan. Richard froze mid-lunge, his head snapping toward the window, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The flashing red and blue lights were already painting the houses across the street. The tables had turned, the trap had sprung, and they were the ones who were caught. The wail of the sirens grew from a distant cry to an overwhelming roar, filling the quiet suburban street with the sound of impending justice. Red and blue lights flashed wildly, strobing across the walls of my bedroom, painting Richard's face in demonic shades of crimson and cobalt. He stood frozen in the ruined doorway, his lunge aborted, his expression a chaotic mixture of rage and sheer panic. The hunter had become the hunted. Martha let out a strangled sob behind him, her hands flying to her mouth. Richard, the police! Her voice was a wisp of sound, swallowed by the noise from outside. The sight of the flashing lights seemed to break his paralysis. His eyes, wild and desperate, darted from me to the window and back again. For a terrifying second, I thought he might still come for me, that in his final cornered moments he would try to finish what he started. But the sound of car doors slamming shut and heavy boots on the driveway below seemed to drain the violence from him, replacing it with a frantic, animalistic need to escape. The back door, he hissed at Martha, grabbing her arm. Now! He turned and bolted from the room, dragging her with him. I heard their heavy footsteps thundering down the stairs. I scrambled for my laptop, snapping it shut, my hands still trembling. I could hear shouts from outside. "This is the police. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." I ran to my window and looked down. The street was a sea of flashing lights. 2 police cruisers were parked haphazardly in front of the house, their doors open. Officers were taking cover behind them, weapons drawn and pointed at the front door. Another officer was covering the back. There was no escape. I saw Leo standing on the sidewalk across the street, illuminated by the strobing lights, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked pale and shaken, but he was safe. He had done it. He had saved my life. He had a friend on standby, a code word, cabin trip, that meant call 911 immediately and give them the address. It was a desperate, last-ditch plan we had come up with, and it had worked. Downstairs, I heard a crash, followed by shouting. The police had breached the front door. "Police, don't move!" I crept out of my room, my heart still hammering, and peered down the stairs. The front hall was filled with uniformed officers. They had Richard and Martha cornered in the living room. Richard was shouting, his voice hoarse with rage and denial. "You have no right! This is my house! What is the meaning of this?" Martha was weeping hysterically, clinging to his arm. "It's a mistake, a misunderstanding," she cried. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "Richard and Martha Vance, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Lily Anderson." At the mention of my real name, Richard's face contorted. "That's a lie. Her name is Alara. She's our daughter. She's mentally unstable." Just then, a plainclothes detective stepped through the door. He was older, with graying hair and tired, kind eyes that seemed to have seen everything. He looked up the stairs and his gaze locked with mine. "Lily?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears starting to stream down my face. A slow, sad smile touched his lips. It was Detective Miller. He had driven all night after receiving my email, coordinating with the local police on the way. The audio file was my probable cause. "It's over, son," he said, turning his attention back to Richard. "We have the recording." Richard's face went slack, the color draining from it as the finality of his situation crashed down upon him. The fight went out of him completely. He sagged against the wall, defeated. The officers moved in, cuffing him and a still sobbing Martha. As they were led out of the house, their heads bowed in shame, Martha's eyes found mine one last time. They were filled with a toxic cocktail of emotions, betrayal, desperation, and a twisted, possessive love. It was the look of a woman who believed her own lies so completely that the truth was incomprehensible. They were escorted past their neighbors, who had spilled out onto their lawns, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights, murmuring and pointing at the perfect family whose perfect life had just imploded. Detective Miller walked slowly up the stairs toward me. He stopped a few feet away, giving me space. "I'm Detective Frank Miller," he said gently. "I've been looking for you for a very long time, Lily." Hearing him say my name, my real name, felt like coming home. The tears I had been holding back for days, for a lifetime, finally came. I collapsed onto the top step, my body racked with sobs of terror, grief, and an overwhelming, earth-shattering relief. It was over. The lie was broken. I was free. Detective Miller didn't rush me. He just stood there, a quiet, patient guardian, until the storm of tears began to subside. He then helped me to my feet and led me downstairs, away from the wreckage of my fake life and toward the uncertain dawn of my real one. He sat with me at the kitchen table, the same table where we had planned the trap, and gently asked me questions, his voice a soothing balm on my raw nerves. The house was now a crime scene, being processed by forensic teams. They would go through the attic, through the trunk, corroborating every detail of the story that had been captured on that tiny recorder. The evidence was overwhelming. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into the kitchen, Detective Miller looked at me, his expression somber but kind. "There's someone who's been waiting 10 years to hear from you," he said. "Your mother, Sarah, she never gave up hope. Would you be ready to talk to her?" My mother! A woman I only knew from a faded photograph. The thought was both terrifying and beautiful. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I was no longer Alara Vance, the daughter of kidnappers. I was Lily Anderson, a survivor, and my story was just beginning. The days that followed were a surreal whirlwind of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and overwhelming media attention. The story of the girl from the poster was a national sensation. Richard and Martha Vance, once respected members of their community, were now infamous villains, their faces splashed across every news channel. Their carefully constructed world had been dismantled with brutal efficiency. The audio recording was undeniable. The contents of the trunk in the attic provided a decade's worth of physical proof. Faced with an ironclad case, their lies crumbled. Richard, cold and calculating to the end, remained silent, his lawyer doing all the talking. But Martha, broken and delusional, confessed to everything in a rambling, tear-filled interview with detectives still trying to frame their horrific crime as an act of love, a rescue. She claimed my real father, Michael, had fallen and hit his head during their argument, a tragic accident. But the forensic evidence, eventually uncovered from an unmarked grave near their old house in Illinois, told a different story. He had died from blunt force trauma. It was murder. Leo became the state's star witness. His cooperation, his guilt, and his own trauma were palpable. He was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against the parents who had manipulated and terrified him into silence for a decade. Our relationship was fractured, perhaps irrevocably, but a fragile thread of understanding remained between us. We were both there, victims, caught in different parts of the same web. He would carry the guilt of his silence forever, a punishment far heavier than any court could impose. But for me, the legal drama was just background noise. My entire focus, my entire being was centered on one single, terrifying, miraculous event: meeting my mother. Detective Miller arranged it. We met in a quiet room at the police station, a neutral ground. He brought her in, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. She was older than in the photograph, of course. There were lines of grief and worry etched around her eyes and mouth. A map of the 10 years she had spent searching for me. But her hair was the same light brown, and her eyes were the same gentle, kind eyes I remembered from a life I could barely grasp. Her name was Sarah. She stopped in the doorway, her hand flying to her chest, a soft gasp escaping her lips. "Lily," she whispered, the name a fragile prayer. Tears streamed down her face as she took a tentative step toward me, then another. I was frozen, a statue of a daughter she hadn't seen in a decade. What was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to say? My life with her was a collection of phantom limbs, memories I knew should be there but couldn't feel. She stopped a few feet in front of me, her hands trembling as if she were afraid to touch me, afraid I might vanish again. "It's really you," she said, her voice choked with a decade of unshed tears. "I never gave up. I knew you were out there somewhere. I knew it. And then, something deep inside me, a primal, long-dormant instinct, broke free. I saw not a stranger, but my mother. I saw the woman who had packed my lunches, who had read me bedtime stories, who had loved me before my world was stolen. I took a step forward and wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in her shoulder. She felt small, fragile, but her arms closed around me with a strength that belied her frame, a strength born of 10 years of desperate hope. We stood there in the middle of that sterile room and cried. We cried for the years we had lost, for the man we had both loved and had been stolen from us, for the impossible, miraculous fact that we had found each other again. Moving in with her was both the easiest and hardest thing I've ever done. Her small, quiet house was filled with pictures of me, school photos, birthday parties, a gap-toothed smile on a swing set. It was a museum of my lost childhood. She had kept my room exactly as I had left it, a time capsule from a sunny Tuesday afternoon 10 years ago. Sleeping in that bed under a unicorn-patterned comforter felt strange, like I was an imposter in my own life. We were strangers, bound by blood and tragedy. We had to learn each other. We tiptoed around each other at first, afraid of saying the wrong thing, of breaking the fragile new reality we were building. She would make me breakfast, and I wouldn't know if I was supposed to like oatmeal. I would talk about a book I'd read and then remember that Alara had read it, not Lily. The lines were blurred. Who was I? Was I the girl who loved hiking and had a passion for photography? The person I had become over the last 10 years? Or was I the girl who loved unicorns and was afraid of the dark, the person I had been? My therapist said I didn't have to choose. She said I was both. I was Lily, and I was a survivor. I was allowed to grieve the life I'd lost, while still holding on to the person I had grown into. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a bridge across the 10-year chasm that separated us. She would tell me stories about my father, Michael, about his terrible jokes, his love for fishing, the way he would sing off-key in the car. She brought him back to life for me, not as a victim, but as a vibrant, loving man. In return, I told her about my life as Alara, about my friends, my dreams of becoming a journalist, the good moments that were now tainted by the lie they were built upon. It was a painful, beautiful process of weaving two separate lives into one single tapestry. One afternoon, several months later, we drove to the cemetery. The trial was over. Richard had been sentenced to life in prison for murder and kidnapping. Martha, deemed a willing accomplice, received a slightly lesser sentence, but would likely die in prison as well. We stood before a new, polished granite headstone that read, Michael Anderson, beloved father. He had finally been laid to rest. My mother placed a bouquet of his favorite wildflowers at the base of the stone. I stood beside her, my hand in hers, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The questions had been answered. The monsters were caged. My past was no longer a terrifying void, but a story of loss and survival. I was home. The road ahead was long, but I would not walk it alone. I had my name back. I had my mother back. And I had a future that was, finally, mine to write. The first year of being Lily again was a study in contrasts. There was the profound, quiet joy of rediscovering a life, and the sharp, lingering pain of the life that was stolen. My mother, Sarah, and I moved through our days with a gentle, deliberate care, as if we were handling something precious and fragile that might break. We were learning the rhythms of each other's lives. I learned that she hummed when she was concentrating, that she drank her coffee black, and that the scent of rain on hot asphalt always made her sad, because it had been about to rain the day I was taken. She learned that I couldn't sleep without a fan on for white noise, that I was fiercely independent to a fault, and that I had a deep, ingrained distrust of people who were overly charming. We were two halves of a whole, piecing ourselves back together. The world outside our small healing bubble was not always so gentle. The media frenzy eventually died down, but I was still recognized sometimes. A whisper in a grocery store, a pointed finger in a coffee shop. That's her, the girl who was missing. I was no longer a person, but a headline, a cautionary tale. For a while, I let it make me angry, but Sarah taught me to see it differently. "They don't see you, Lily," she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "They see a story. Your job isn't to be their story, it's to live your own." Her words became my mantra. I decided to go back to college, but not in Ohio. I enrolled in a local university close to home. I changed my major from journalism to psychology. The idea of reporting on other people's trauma felt ghoulish now. Instead, I wanted to understand it. I wanted to learn how people heal, how the mind can survive the unthinkable. My own therapy was a slow, arduous process. We untangled the knots of my identity. We talked about Alara, the girl I had been. Grieving her felt strange, like mourning a ghost who was also myself. I had to accept that the love I felt for Martha and Richard, as twisted and false as its foundation was, had been real to me. The child part of my brain had loved them, and acknowledging that was part of my healing. It wasn't a betrayal of my real parents. It was the simple, complicated truth of a child's heart. One of the most difficult parts of my new life was navigating my relationship with Leo. After the trial, he moved to the other side of the country and tried to disappear. He changed his name and cut off all contact. I understood his need to escape the shadow of his parents, but his absence left a void. He was the only other person on earth who truly understood the texture of that lie, who had lived inside it with me. Then, about 2 years after the trial, a letter arrived. It had no return address, but I recognized his handwriting immediately. It was a short letter, just a few paragraphs long. He apologized again, not for his silence as a child, but for running away as an adult. He told me he was in therapy, that he was working a simple job, and that for the first time in his life, he felt like he could breathe. He wrote, "I know I can never be your brother, not in the way that counts, but I hope one day I can be your friend. You saved me as much as I saved you that night." I wrote back immediately. I told him I forgave him, and more importantly, that he needed to forgive himself. We began a slow, tentative correspondence, letters and emails bridging the distance between us. We were two survivors, charting a new map for our lives, and it was a comfort to know his compass was pointing toward peace, just like mine. My relationship with my mother blossomed. The initial awkwardness gave way to a deep, comfortable intimacy. We found our shared sense of humor, a dry wit that had clearly come from my father. We finished each other's sentences. We fell into the easy, unspoken rhythm of family. One day, she brought a large box down from her attic, the opposite of the dark, menacing trunk from my other life. This one was filled with home videos. We spent an entire weekend watching them. And there he was, my father, Michael, in living color. I saw him pushing me on a swing, his face alight with laughter. I saw him teaching me to ride a bike, running alongside me, his hand steady on the seat. I saw him at my 5th birthday party, wearing a goofy party hat, his arm draped protectively around my mother. I watched him and I cried, but this time the tears weren't for the loss. They were tears of recognition. I was finally getting to know him. In the videos, I saw myself too. A happy, bright, fearless little girl named Lily. Watching her, I realized she had never truly disappeared. She had been there all along, dormant, waiting under the layers of Alara. Finding her again wasn't about erasing the person I had become. It was about integrating her, welcoming her back. The scar above my eye, the one Martha said came from a swing set, was a constant reminder. Detective Miller had discovered the truth of it. I had gotten it a week before I was taken from falling out of a tree I wasn't supposed to be climbing. My father had been furious and terrified, and had then held me for an hour after the doctor stitched me up. The scar was not a mark of a lie, but a mark of my real life, a memory from my father that they could not erase. It was a piece of my truth, hidden in plain sight all along. I was Lily Anderson, and I was finally, completely home.